The German Shepherd had been chained to the back wall of the motel for 3 days. Her neck was raw. Her ribs showed through soaked fur. She had 2 newborn puppies locked in a storage room she could not reach. And she had been throwing herself against that chain every hour, trying to get back to them. When Ethan Cole walked around the corner of Cedar Ridge Motor Inn in the rain and saw her, she did not bark. She did not beg. She turned her body sideways, took the hem of his jacket in her teeth, and pulled him toward the door. Behind that door was the beginning of something that would shake an entire town to its foundation. If this story reaches your heart, please subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and tell us in the comments what city you are watching from. We want to know how far this story travels. Now stay with us until the very end, because what this dog led one man to find that night was something no one in that county was prepared for. The rain had been building for 2 hours before Ethan Cole finally pulled off the highway. He had not planned to stop. He never planned anything anymore, not since leaving the teams 8 months ago. Planning required a reason to arrive somewhere, and Ethan had stopped believing in destinations around the same time he stopped sleeping through the night. He drove because moving was easier than staying still. He drove because roads did not ask questions. Cedar Ridge Motor Inn appeared out of the rain the way bad places always did, suddenly, without warning, looking almost reasonable until you were already inside its orbit. A flickering sign, a cracked lot, a drained swimming pool full of black rainwater. The kind of place that had once been ordinary and had been something else for a long time since. Remy shifted in the back seat. Ethan glanced in the mirror. The dog was sitting up, ears forward, nose working against the gap in the window. Remy was 4 years old, tan gold and black, a German Shepherd who had served 2 deployments and retired with more quiet dignity than most men managed. He did not bark without reason. He did not alert without cause. When he sat up like that, Ethan had learned to pay attention. "Easy," Ethan said. Remy did not relax. Ethan killed the engine and sat for a moment in the dark and the rain. He was 30 years old, but carried the particular stillness of a man who had compressed a great deal of living into a short span, and had come out the other side quieter than he went in. His dark brown hair was cut short. His NWU Type 3 camo jacket, green and brown digital pattern, faded at the shoulders from weather and use, was the same one he had worn on the last real mission he would ever run. He still wore it, because replacing it had felt like a claim he was not ready to make. He told himself he only wanted coffee, maybe 10 minutes out of the rain. Then he would get back on the road. He got out of the truck. Remy whined once, low and tight, through the cracked window. "I'll be back in 10 minutes, Ethan said. "Stay." The motel office was empty. A brass bell sat on the counter under a handwritten sign that read, "Ring if you need help," though the place had the hollow feel of somewhere help had stopped arriving a long time ago. A soda cooler hummed. A television in the corner played with the sound turned low. Behind the counter, no one. Ethan was turning to leave when he heard it. A chain, striking brick. Once, then again. Not random. Not loose hardware rattling in the wind. This was an irregular rhythm, short and weak and desperate. The sound of something that kept trying not to stop. He froze. His body knew that sound before his mind could name it. The shoulders went tight. The breathing changed. There had been a night 2 years ago in a country he could not talk about, where he had heard metal striking metal from behind a locked door, and he had made a decision based on time and resources and the bleeding man directly in front of him. And he had lived with the math of that decision every single day since. The chain struck the wall again. He was already moving. He came around the back corner of the building and found her. She was tied to an iron hook set into the brick wall beside a heavy storage door. A German shepherd, adult, her tan gold and black coat plastered dark with rain, her ribs hollowed out like the hull of something gutted. The chain attached to her collar had worn a raw groove into the skin of her neck. One hind leg trembled under her own weight. Fresh blood had dried in rust-colored tracks along her shoulder. She did not bark when she saw him. She turned sideways, not to flee, not to attack. She put her body between him and the storage door and watched him with amber eyes that were burning and bright despite the fever behind them. And she made a sound low in her chest that was not a growl and was not a whine. It was something older than either, the sound of an animal that had already paid every cost it had and was still standing because it had not finished what it came to do. Ethan crouched slowly. He showed her his open palms. "It's all right," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he meant it to. "I'm not here to hurt you." The dog stared at his hands, then his face, then his hands again, reading him the way animals read people, not with words, but with everything that lives underneath them. Then she moved toward him, reached out, and took the edge of his jacket hem gently between her teeth. She pulled. Ethan did not move. She pulled again, released him, looked at the storage door, looked back at him. Then she limped to the door and pressed the side of her body against it, trembling, eyes fixed on him, waiting. Ethan stood very still for 3 full seconds. Then he crouched again and looked at the ground near the base of the door. Even in the rain, even in bad light, he saw them. Tiny paw prints pressed into the concrete where the overhang had shielded it. And beside them, a thin dark streak along the gap at the bottom of the door. Something small dragged through a narrow space. Recently. He breathed in slow. Under the rain, under the rust and mildew and wet brick, something faint and unmistakable. Milk. He looked at the dog, her hollow flanks, her swollen joints, her eyes which had not left his face. "You've got puppies in there," he said quietly. It was not a question. She whined, once, short, as if she had been waiting for him to understand for a very long time. He drew the folding knife from his pocket and showed it to her before reaching for the chain. She bared her teeth when the blade came near her neck, not at him, but at the metal, at the thing that had held her. He worked the rusted clasp until it gave. The chain fell. For a second she swayed as the tension released, as if freedom itself had weight, and she did not know what to do with the absence of the thing that had been hurting her. Then she took one step, stopped, looked back at him, and pressed her muzzle once against his wrist. "Okay," Ethan said. "Show me." The storage door was padlocked. The wood around the frame had gone soft from years of rain, and Ethan tested it with one hand before stepping back and measuring the angle. The old instinct came back, clean and without ceremony. Not the violence of it, but the geometry, weight, weak point, commitment. He drove his boot against the latch. Wood splintered. The door jumped inward hard. The smell hit him first. Oil and mildew and old cardboard, and beneath it, cutting through everything else, the sharp biological smell of young animals and fear. His flashlight found the puppies behind a fallen shelf, 2 of them, pressed together in a nest of dirty blankets. Shepherd mix, maybe 3 weeks old, one lighter-faced and one darker, both shivering with a total body trembling that had gone past cold into something more desperate. They made sounds too small for the room. Thin, searching sounds, their noses working even as their bodies shook. The mother pushed past Ethan's leg and crashed into the blankets with a broken sound, half cry and half groan, and both puppies crawled toward her with everything they had. Ethan stood in the doorway and let that happen. He did not move. Some things had to finish before anything else could begin. Then, from deeper in the room, from behind the workbench along the far wall, came a sound that was not animal. Metal on concrete. Slow. Deliberate. A human hand knocking. Because the human who owned it had no other option left. Ethan swung the flashlight toward the back wall and found him. An old man on the floor, bound at the wrists with electrical cord looped around a steel rack. Silver hair. A bruised jaw that had gone yellow and purple at once. A split lip. Eyes that were sunken but alert, blinking against the light, tracking Ethan with the particular focus of someone who has been waiting and did not dare to believe the wait was over. He was thin, 70 years old, maybe 71, built by decades of physical labor into something wiry and stubborn that had simply refused to quit being itself. Even tied to the floor, even battered and dehydrated, he had positioned himself between the puppies and the door. Even then. "Don't let her bark," the old man rasped. His voice sounded like something dragged over gravel. "They'll come back." Ethan crossed the room in 4 steps and knelt beside him and cut the cord at his wrists. The man winced hard as blood returned to his hands. He pressed both palms flat against the floor to steady himself. "What's your name?" Ethan asked. "Harold," the old man said. "Harold Greer. I've been the groundskeeper here for 22 years. He paused and coughed once, dry and ragged. "And tonight's been the worst night of every single one of them." Ethan checked his eyes, his breathing, the bruising on his jaw and cheekbone. "Did they hit your head?" Harold looked at him with flat, dry patience. "Not enough to improve me." Ethan almost said something. He stopped himself. Men who made that kind of joke while tied to storage racks were either fools or survivors, and Harold Greer did not look like a fool. "Can you stand?" "With your help. My dignity left about 6 hours ago." Ethan got an arm under the old man's shoulders and brought him upright slowly. Harold sucked air through his teeth and gripped the shelf with one hand until the dizziness passed. Then he looked at the mother dog feeding her puppies on the dirty blankets, and his face did something that was not easy to watch. "I tried to stop them," Harold said. He was not talking to Ethan. "I tried." The dog lifted her head and looked at Harold. Then she made a low sound, not a growl, not a whine, something between the two, and settled back over her puppies. Her amber eyes went half closed but stayed on the old man's face. She knew him. Whatever had happened in this room before Ethan arrived, whatever choices had been made and costs paid, the dog knew this man, and she was not afraid of him. Ethan let that register. Then he looked at the door. "How many men?" Harold steadied himself. "Dunlap and at least 2 of his crew. Maybe more. He has a man on the inside, too." He stopped, looked at Ethan carefully, as if measuring something. "A deputy. Name is Carver. Wade Carver." The name landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. "County," Ethan said. "County," Harold confirmed. "He comes around after hours, never in uniform, never with his lights on, never files anything after." Harold's voice had gone quiet and precise in the way of a man who had been watching and remembering because he knew no one would believe him without proof. "I have seen him walk into that office and walk out with things in his coat that he didn't walk in with. I don't know what. But I know what men look like when they trust each other in a way that should make everybody else nervous." Outside, across the parking lot, a car engine turned over. Both men went still. Then headlights swept across the crack under the storage door, bright and slow, moving toward the back of the building. Harold's face went the color of old ash. His voice dropped to almost nothing. "That'll be him," he said. "That'll be Dunlap." The mother dog raised her head. Her body went rigid over the puppies, every muscle pulling tight. A growl gathered in her chest, deep and broken. Not performance, not warning, preparation. Outside, tires rolled slow over wet gravel and stopped. A car door opened, then another. And then a voice came through the wall, smooth and unhurried. The voice of a man who had never once in his life believed that the night did not belong to him. "I know somebody opened the storage room." Harold closed his eyes. Ethan lowered himself below the window line and looked at the old man and the mother dog and the two puppies. And he made exactly the kind of calculation he had spent 8 months trying to stop making. He had come in for coffee. He had come in for 10 minutes out of the rain. He had come in for nothing more than that. But the chain had struck the wall, and he had turned toward it instead of away. And now there was a man with bound wrists, and 2 small animals, and a wounded mother, who had held on for 3 days because she had not finished what she came to do. Ethan pressed his back against the wall beside the door. He looked at Harold. He kept his voice to nothing. "Is there another way out of this room?" Harold did not answer right away. He looked at the door, then at the mother dog, then back at Ethan, with the expression of a man running inventory on things he had spent years pretending not to notice. "Laundry corridor," Harold said finally. "Behind that partition wall. Narrow. Leads to the south end of the building." "How narrow?" "Narrow enough that Dunlap's men won't enjoy it." Ethan was already moving. He gathered both puppies from the blanket, tucking one inside his jacket against his chest and cradling the other in the crook of his arm. They were so light, it frightened him. He could feel their ribs, their heartbeats, the tiny, frantic trembling of bodies that had been cold too long. The mother dog watched every motion with an intensity that had nothing sick in it. Even half collapsed with fever, even barely able to hold her own weight, her eyes tracked the puppies with a precision that said she was still counting, still working, still refusing to be done. "Can you move?" Ethan asked Harold. "Ask me something easier." "Move anyway." Harold pushed off the shelf and made it upright on the second try. He did not complain. That told Ethan more about the man than any biography could have. Outside, the voice came again, closer now. Still smooth, still patient. The patience of a man who had never once been told no by anyone who could make it stick. "Amos, I know you're in there. You can save us both some time." Harold's jaw tightened. He moved toward the partition wall without another word. Ethan found the latch, forced it, and the narrow passage opened into a smell of old bleach and rust. He went through first with the puppies, then turned and steadied Harold through, then held the passage open and looked back. The mother dog had not moved. She was still planted in the center of the storage room, her body aimed at the main door, her growl so low it was almost below hearing. A sound you felt more than listened to. "Come on," Ethan said quietly. "Come on, girl." She turned her head toward the passage, then toward the door, then back to him. In that pause, in that one suspended second, Ethan understood something he had not expected to understand about an animal he had known for less than 20 minutes. She was deciding whether to stay and fight, or trust that the thing she was protecting could survive without her, standing between it and the world. Then she heard one of the puppies make a small sound from inside Ethan's jacket. And that was the end of the debate. She came. The laundry corridor was exactly as bad as Harold had promised. They moved through it single file, Harold's breathing rough and shallow beside him, the mother dog dragging her injured leg behind them both. At the far end, an emergency exit door had swollen shut with years of humidity. Ethan hit it once with his shoulder. Nothing. He hit it again, harder, and felt the seal start to give. and on the third strike, it broke open into cold air and rain. The mother dog went through first. They came out into the alley behind the building, rain still coming down in long silver ropes, and Ethan pressed Harold against the wall and stood still for 5 full seconds, listening. No flashlights, no footsteps on gravel behind them. Not yet. "There's a cabin," Harold said between breaths. 2 miles east. Old Fire Road." "Whose cabin?" "Ruth Calloway." Harold's voice changed when he said it. Not softer exactly. More solid. The way a person's voice changes when they say the name of someone they trust completely and have not had to say out loud in a while. "She used to dispatch for volunteer fire. 20 years. Smart woman. Lives alone. Has a landline and a radio, and absolutely no patience for men who think age is the same as helplessness." "She'll let us in?" Harold almost smiled. "She'll have coffee ready before you finish knocking." They moved through the dark at the pace Harold could manage, which was slower than Ethan wanted and faster than the old man should have been able to sustain. The mother dog worked beside them in a limping, determined line, her eyes forward, her whole body radiating a fever that had no business leaving her still functional. But she did not stop. She did not slow. She checked the puppies inside Ethan's jacket every 30 seconds by shoving her nose briefly against the fabric, and then she kept moving. Halfway through the pines, Harold stumbled. Ethan caught him before he hit the ground, took the old man's weight across his shoulders, and kept walking. Harold did not thank him. He used the breath for something more useful. "My granddaughter," Harold said. "Sarah. She works the front desk. She's the one who first started seeing it." "Seeing what?" "The pattern." Harold breathed through a bad stretch, steadied, continued. "Cash-only rooms. Guests with no names. Dogs in the back lot at odd hours. Then other things. Sounds from the end rooms that didn't belong to any dog." He stopped walking. Ethan stopped with him. Harold looked at him directly, and in the dark and the rain his bruised face was very clear. She started writing things down. License plates, dates, times. She hid it all somewhere Dunlap would never look. Ethan felt the shape of something larger beginning to form under the story Harold was telling. "Where is she now?" Harold did not answer immediately. That silence was its own answer. "They took her," Ethan said, not a question. "I don't know." Harold's voice broke on the last word, just barely, the way old men's voices break when they have been holding something for too long and the body finally decides it is not going to cooperate anymore. "I don't know where she is. I don't know if she's all right. And that is a thing I cannot stop thinking about." The mother dog pressed herself briefly against Harold's knee, just for a second, just long enough. They reached Ruth Calloway's cabin at the end of the fire road 20 minutes later, and she opened the door before Harold finished raising his hand to knock. She took one look at the bruised old man, the soaked Navy SEAL with 2 puppies inside his jacket, and the fevered German shepherd trying to hold herself together by stubbornness alone. She stepped back without a word. "Get in," she said. "No questions yet. Questions after coffee." The cabin was warm and smelled of wood smoke and something strong brewing. Ruth moved through it with the economical speed of a woman who had spent decades dispatching other people into emergencies and had no tolerance for wasted motion. A braided rug went down near the stove. A folded quilt appeared from a shelf. The puppies went into the quilt. The mother dog walked to them, checked them both thoroughly with her nose, and then lay down across the edge of the quilt with the careful deliberateness of a body that had finally granted itself one small permission. Harold sat in a chair and pressed both hands flat on his knees and stared at the floor with the look of a man whose adrenaline had run its course and left him alone with what remained. Ruth was already at the landline. 40 minutes later, headlights swung across the front window, and a woman Ethan did not know came through the door, rolling up her sleeves and carrying a veterinary bag that looked heavy enough to matter. Claire Voss was 35, sharp-eyed and efficient, with the focused displeasure of a professional who had been pulled from sleep to look at something that should never have happened. She examined Harold first. Bruised ribs, mild concussion, dehydration. She told him in plain language that he was lucky, and then moved to the mother dog without pausing for his response. The dog tried to stand when Claire approached. Ethan put a steadying hand on her chest. She held still, barely, her eyes moving between Claire's hands and the puppy's, keeping the count. Claire worked without speaking for a while. When she reached the raw groove around the dog's neck, something changed in her face. Not shock, something colder and more specific than shock. "This is not from one night," she said. "This animal has been chained repeatedly. Long term." Her fingers moved to the bruising along the shoulder. They stopped. And this came from a human being swinging something at her on purpose. The cabin went quiet. Harold looked at his hands. "She wouldn't stop fighting the chain," he said quietly. "Every time they came near the puppies, she fought, and they kept hitting her for it." "How long?" Claire asked. 3 weeks, Harold said. "Maybe more. Since the litter was born. Since Sarah—" He stopped, swallowed. "Since my granddaughter tried to intervene the first time." Claire looked up from the dog. "Where is your granddaughter now?" The question sat in the room like a lit match held over something dry. Harold's answer came out barely above a whisper. "I don't know." Then, before anyone could speak again, Harold sat forward with a suddenness that made Claire reach for him. He pressed 2 fingers to his temple. "She said something," he said, "when they dragged me to the storage room. Sarah looked at me, and she was trying not to cry. Lord, she was trying so hard, and she said, 'If something happens, find room 11. He looked up. "Don't trust the front desk ledger." Ethan had not sat down since they arrived. He was standing near the wall with his arms crossed and his jaw set, running the math on everything Harold had told him, and the math kept coming out wrong in the same direction. "You said there's a deputy," Ethan said. "Carver." "Wade Carver," Harold confirmed. "Mid-40s. He's been visiting the motel off-book for months. No lights, no uniform, no paperwork afterward. I've seen him hand things to Dunlap through the office window at 2 in the morning. I don't know what, but I know what it looks like when 2 men trust each other in a way that everybody else should be afraid of." Ethan looked at Ruth. She looked back at him with the steady expression of a woman who had spent 20 years making judgment calls in the dark. "Don't call county," Ethan said. Ruth nodded once. "Already ahead of you." The mother dog lifted her head from the quilt. Both puppies were asleep against her belly. She looked at Ethan with her amber eyes, and the fever was still there. The exhaustion was still there. But under it, locked in solid and quiet, was something that did not waver. Sarah had left a message in room 11, and somewhere behind the front desk of Cedar Ridge Motor Inn, in a motel that had been swallowed slowly by a man who had counted on everyone being too tired to fight back, the next piece of this story was waiting. Ethan reached for his jacket. Remy was already standing by the door. Ethan drove back towards Cedar Ridge Motor Inn, with the window cracked and Remy in the back seat reading the air. The rain had thinned to a cold mist. The highway was empty. He ran the math on what Harold had told him, and kept arriving at the same answer. Sarah had known something bad was coming. She had prepared for it. That meant somewhere inside that motel, behind a door numbered 11, was whatever she had managed to save before they took her. He left the truck half a mile out and went in on foot through the tree line. He wore the orange roadwork vest he kept behind the seat for highway jobs, pulled over his NWU jacket. The kind of thing that made a man look like he belonged to the infrastructure, rather than an investigation. Remy worked 20 yards to his left, moving silent through the wet scrub, checking back every 30 seconds. The parking lot was quiet. A woman in a housecoat smoked outside room 3 without looking up. A television played loud behind a thin wall somewhere near the middle of the building. The ordinary noise of a place where people pass through without belonging. Deputy Wade Carver's cruiser was already in the lot. Ethan stopped at the tree line and watched. Carver came out of the motel office at 8:14, moving without hurry, jacket open, badge catching the pale morning light once. He crossed to where Mason Dunlap stood near the far end of the walkway, and the two of them spoke for less than 4 minutes. No raised voices, no visible tension. The easy, unhurried posture of men who had been exchanging things for long enough that it no longer required any performance. Then, Carver handed Dunlap something small. Folded paper or a key. Ethan could not tell from the distance. What he could tell was that Carver never looked toward the room numbers, never logged anything on his radio. He walked back to his cruiser and drove out of the lot the same way he had arrived, without lights and without paperwork. Dunlap watched him go. Then he went back inside. Ethan waited 3 full minutes before crossing the lot. The motel office was empty again. He worked the front desk drawers with his knife, found the third one stuck at the latch, forced it, and inside the back panel his hand closed around something small and metal. A brass key. The number scratched into the oval head read 11. Sarah had not just hidden the message, she had hidden the door to it. He pocketed the key and moved down the older wing, counting numbers, until he reached the room. He entered fast and let the door close behind him. Remy came around from the far side of the building and posted outside without being told. The room smelled of cheap cleanser and old cigarettes, and the particular staleness of a space that had been cleaned in a hurry by someone who wanted it to look untouched. The bedspread was tucked too neatly. The remote sat too square beside the Bible in the nightstand drawer. Ethan had searched enough rooms in enough countries to know the difference between a space that had never been used and a space that had been erased. He worked through it systematically. Under the mattress, behind the framed print, the toilet tank, the vent, the headboard, the underside of every drawer. Nothing. He stood in the center of the room and breathed and let the silence work the way silence sometimes did when you stopped trying to find things and started waiting for them to surface. Then Remy scratched at the door. Ethan opened it a fraction. The dog pushed inside without ceremony and went directly to the wardrobe against the far wall. He pawed at the base panel once, twice, then held, nose pressed to the seam, body absolutely still. Ethan crossed the room and crouched. He tapped the panel, hollow where it should not have been. He pried it open with the flat end of his knife, and the board came loose on the second try. Inside the cavity behind the wardrobe were 3 things. A burner phone with a SIM card removed and the battery missing. A folded piece of motel stationery, damp at the edges. The handwriting pressed hard into the paper, the way handwriting looks when the hand behind it is shaking. And a micro SD card wrapped in clear tape and sealed inside a plastic soap cap. He unfolded the note first. If I disappear, don't bring this to Carver. They don't only keep dogs. Find the old landing by the water. Don't trust the front desk ledger. No signature. She had not needed one. Ethan read it twice. Then he read the line again that his mind had already circled and would not let go. They don't only keep dogs. He connected his phone adapter to the card. Most of the files were corrupted. Water damage or haste, probably both. One video survived. The image was low and grainy, and shot from close to the floor, the lens angled up from what looked like a laundry room. For several seconds, there was nothing but the legs of plastic baskets and stained linoleum. Then it swung upward, just long enough. Mason Dunlap in profile, pulling a wire crate toward the rear exit. Something moving inside the crate. Then another set of legs crossing the frame. Work boots, dark pants. Then Sarah's voice, pulled so tight it was nearly nothing. "If they find me, give this to—" Static. Black screen. Ethan replayed it. Same result. He checked under the bed before standing, and his hand found something on the carpet near the far leg. Small. Plastic. Round. He pulled it out and held it under the light. A baby bottle cap. Pale blue. Scuffed and recent. Not the kind of thing left by accident. Not the kind of thing that belonged in a room that was supposed to be empty. He sat very still on the edge of the bed and looked at the cap in his palm, and felt the entire shape of the story tilt into something heavier and darker than a man running a dog trafficking operation through a failing motel. They don't only keep dogs. He was still sitting there when Remy growled. Low and short. The sound the dog made when something had changed in the environment in a way that required immediate attention. Ethan moved to the window and looked through the curtain edge. Carver was back. Not at the office this time. He was standing near the trash enclosure at the far end of the lot, smoking, one shoulder against the wall. And Dunlap was beside him. They were too far for Ethan to hear, but he watched Carver's hand move once toward his jacket. And he watched Dunlap take what came out of it without looking at it. And he watched the deputy finish his cigarette and walk back to his cruiser with the comfortable slowness of a man who has never once worried about a witness. Remy made the sound again, softer this time, just to mark that he had noticed too. Ethan let the curtain fall and finished searching the room. Near the bed leg, a drag mark on the carpet, nearly invisible. In the bathroom trash, under a tissue and a soap wrapper, a single child's cracker ground into the liner. On the inside edge of the closet door, low, the kind of low that only made sense if you were looking for it, or if you were the right height to make it. 4 horizontal scratches in the paint, the kind left by something metal scraped back and forth. A ring, a buckle, a crate latch. He photographed everything on his phone. He walked out of room 11, carrying his clipboard and wearing the boredom of a maintenance man who had found only wiring trouble. Remy fell in beside him without a word between them, and they moved down the walkway and around the side of the building toward the tree line. Only when they reached the dead strip of grass behind the ice machine did Ethan crouch and rest one hand on the back of Remy's neck. The dog leaned into it for exactly 1 second, then lifted his head and looked toward the woods and the lake road beyond them. She wrote, "Find the old landing by the water," Ethan said quietly. "You and me both know what that means." Remy looked at him, amber eyes, steady, waiting. Ethan straightened. He thought about the bottle cap. He thought about the scratch marks at the height of a child's reach. He thought about the line Sarah had pressed into motel stationery with a shaking hand. The line she had made the most important one in a note she was writing in the dark with no guarantee anyone would ever find it. They don't only keep dogs. He was halfway to the tree line when the sound came from behind him. A door slamming hard enough to carry across the whole back lot. He turned without stopping. Dunlap was standing in the open, one hand raised to shade his eyes, scanning the property with the slow, deliberate attention of a man who sensed something had shifted and was not yet willing to name it. He was not looking directly at Ethan. Not yet. But his gaze was moving in the right direction, and it was moving with purpose. Ethan kept walking, steady, unhurried, the vest doing its job. He reached the trees before Dunlap's eyes arrived at the spot where he had been standing. He did not exhale until the pines closed around him. Back at Ruth's cabin, he laid the objects on the table, one by one. The note, the card, the burner phone shell, and last, the pale blue bottle cap. Harold stared at it and did not speak for a long time. When he did, his voice came from somewhere that sounded like a man arriving at the edge of something he had not known was there until he was already standing on it. "Dear God," Harold whispered. Claire looked up from where she was checking the mother dog's leg. Ruth set the coffee pot down with a care that had nothing to do with the pot. Remy crossed the room and lay down beside the puppies without being asked, as if he understood that the weight in the room required something steady near the most vulnerable things in it. Ethan looked at Harold. "The note says, 'Find the old landing by the water.' What does that mean to you?" Harold's eyes came up slowly. "Settler's Cove," he said. "There's an abandoned boathouse behind the old launch dock. Dunlap used it. Said he kept storage there." He paused. "But he never wanted me near it. Not once in 2 years." "Has Lena been there?" Ethan asked. Harold looked at the mother dog. She had raised her head at the word boathouse. Her ears were forward. Her eyes had sharpened in the particular way they did when something in the conversation crossed into territory she recognized. Harold's voice went quiet. "Yes," he said. "I think she has." Ruth pulled the county map from the shelf behind her and spread it flat on the table without ceremony. Her finger found Settler's Cove in 4 seconds. "Road in is passable if you go from the south side," she said. "Takes about 15 minutes if the mud hasn't closed the shoulder." "Then we go tonight," Ethan said. That was when the rear window of Ruth's truck exploded inward. Glass across the porch boards, cold air rushing through the frame. One shot, no second. A warning placed with surgical precision by someone who wanted them to know exactly how much time they had left. Remy was already at the door. Harold had gone pale to the roots of his silver hair. Claire had one hand braced on the floor and her eyes locked on the tree line through the broken window. Ruth's face had not changed at all. She looked at Ethan with the flat composure of a woman who had spent 2 decades being the calmest person in the worst situations her county could produce. "He knows we found the room," she said. "Yes," Ethan said. "Then Settler's Cove won't be enough anymore. If Sarah left something at the boathouse, Dunlap will move it before we reach it." Ruth looked at the map. Her finger moved east, past the cove, past the lake road, up a logging cut marked in faded ink, toward a name printed in letters smaller than everything around them. "There's one more place," she said. "Harold, tell him about Black Pine." Harold did not look surprised that she knew. He looked like a man who had been carrying a stone for a long time and had finally been given permission to set it down. "Black Pine Hunting Camp," Harold said. 40 minutes east, up an old logging road. Closed for years after a propane accident. He looked directly at Ethan. "Sarah told me once, if Dunlap ever needed to keep somebody hidden for more than a night, that's where he would use." He stopped, his hands pressed flat on the table in front of him. She said it like she already knew, like she was telling me in advance. The cabin held the silence of that for a long moment. Then Lena stood up from the quilt. She crossed to the table, pressed her nose to the note still lying open in front of Ethan, and then walked to the door and stood there. Not barking, not circling, just standing with the patient, unambiguous certainty of an animal that had already decided what came next, and was waiting for the humans to catch up. Ethan looked at her. He looked at Remy. He picked up the bottle cap from the table and closed his fist around it. "Then that's where she is," he said. Ruth drove them as far as the logging cut would allow, headlights off for the last quarter-mile, following the road by memory and the pale shape of the tree line. She stopped where a washout crossed the track and put the truck in park without being asked. 30 minutes, she said. "If I don't hear from you, I stop waiting and start calling everyone who isn't Wade Carver." "Give us 40, Ethan said. 35, and that's generosity." Ethan got out. Remy dropped from the back seat and moved immediately to the left, nose down, working the edge of the road in quick, efficient sweeps. Lena came last. She had refused to stay at the cabin with the same quiet, absolute stubbornness she had used every time someone tried to make a decision for her that she had already made for herself. Claire had wrapped her leg. Harold had tried twice to keep her back. She had walked to the truck and stood beside it and looked at Ethan until he opened the door. He had not argued. Some things were not arguments. The camp sat above them on a rise, and Ethan moved uphill through brush and shadow, with Remy working the perimeter, and Lena tracking close on 3 legs and something stronger than the 4th. He could feel the generator before he heard it, a low vibration in the ground that told him the camp was active and powered, and not trying to hide itself from anyone who was not supposed to know it was there. A security camera bracketed the front path under the eave of the metal annex. Ethan circled wide, found the cable line running along the rear wall, and cut it with one clean motion. No alarm. Either Dunlap trusted the remoteness of the place more than his equipment, or he had grown comfortable in the way that men grew comfortable when they had been doing wrong things for long enough without consequence. Ethan went in through the rear of the annex. The smell was the first thing. Mildew and kerosene and rope, and the cold human smell of fear that concentrates in closed spaces and does not dissipate the way ordinary odors do. Wire crates along one wall, a coil of nylon rope, dented metal bowls with water still sitting in them, a child's yellow fleece blanket folded over a broken seat cushion near the far wall. Remy stopped walking. Ethan stopped with him. The dog was not alerting to a person. He was standing with his head low and his body completely still, reading something in the air that had no visible shape. Then he moved toward a utility door at the back of the annex, and he sat down in front of it, and he looked at Ethan over his shoulder. Ethan pulled the bolt and opened the door. Sarah Greer was on the floor with her wrists zip-tied in front of her, one eye swollen toward purple, her bottom lip split, her chestnut hair hanging loose and damp around a face that was pale beneath the bruising, but absolutely furiously awake. She looked up when the door opened, and for 1/2 second her whole body flinched backward. Then she saw Remy behind Ethan's shoulder, and something in her face broke open and held at the same time. "You found her," she whispered. She meant Lena. She knew Remy's name, and she knew what his presence meant, and she understood in the space of one breath that Harold had made it out. "She's safe," Ethan said. He was already cutting the zip ties. "Puppies, too. Harold's at a cabin 2 miles west with a woman named Ruth." Sarah exhaled through her teeth as the tension released from her wrists. She pressed both hands flat against the floor and breathed for a moment. Just breathed, the way people did when they had been holding themselves together through force alone and needed 1 second to confirm the force was still working. "Can you walk?" "Yes." She was already pushing herself upright. Her mind was moving faster than her body, and she was letting it. "Don't use the front of the annex. The main path camera is live. The rear one is dead. Carver checked it 2 days ago and didn't bother replacing it." She reached inside the lining of her jacket with shaking hands and pulled out a micro SD card sealed under a strip of duct tape. She pressed it into Ethan's palm. "This one's complete, everything. Names, dates, payments, transfers, everything I managed to document in the 14 months I worked that front desk. Ethan looked at the card, then at her. 14 months. I knew what he was doing by month 2, Sarah said. It took me 12 more to get enough that nobody could walk it back. Her jaw was set hard in the way of someone who has made peace with a decision that cost them something they did not expect to pay. I just didn't get out fast enough. Lena appeared in the doorway behind Ethan. She came in low and moved directly to Sarah, and pressed her nose against the young woman's knee and held it there. Sarah's composure lasted exactly as long as it took her hand to reach the dog's head. Then her eyes filled, and she pressed her face into the black and tan fur for one moment. One single moment. And then she straightened and wiped her face with her forearm, and was done with it. "What else is in this camp?" Ethan asked. Sarah's expression shifted. Something in it went tighter and more careful. "More than dogs," she said. "Less than they think we know." She opened her mouth to say the rest, and that was when Remy changed. It happened fast. His whole frame dropped and compacted, ears pinned forward, weight shifting to his front legs, a sound gathering in his chest that Ethan had heard in 2 countries and had never once been wrong about. Ethan was already moving toward the door when it opened from the outside. Deputy Wade Carver stepped in with his sidearm held low and ready. Not pointed yet, meant to be noticed. He was heavier than he had looked from across the motel parking lot, and older. The kind of age that showed up in a man's face when the thing he had been telling himself about himself for years finally stopped being convincing, even to him. His eyes moved from Ethan to Sarah to the dog and back to Ethan. And they were the eyes of a man who had made too many small decisions and arrived somewhere he had not planned to be, and was going to blame the distance rather than the direction. "You should have stayed out of this," Carver said. Ethan kept his body between Sarah and the door. His voice came out level and without heat. "Little late for that advice. I'm going to need you to put your hands where I can see them and step away from the girl." Sarah's voice came from behind Ethan's shoulder, cracked and clear. "He's not the one you should be talking to, Wade. You've known what's been happening here for 8 months. You've taken things from that man's hand in parking lots after midnight. You want to talk about stepping away from people?" Her voice did not shake. "You stepped away from every single one of us." Something moved through Carver's face. Not shame, the older and uglier relative of it, which is the anger that rises when someone names the thing out loud that you have been working very hard not to hear. He took one step forward, and then the smell hit. Smoke. Not much at first, then fast. Then the orange flicker at the seam of the tarp stack along the far wall, and the particular quality of light that did not belong to anything electrical. Dunlap was burning the annex. Not to kill them, to erase everything inside it before anyone with real authority arrived. "Move," Ethan said. Carver swore and backed toward the exit, survival overriding everything else in him at once. Ethan shoved Sarah toward the rear door. Remy went ahead. Lena followed, teeth bared, not at any one person, but at the collapsing logic of the room. They were 10 feet from the exit when it came. A hollow metallic knock from behind the far interior wall. Slow. Weak. The sound of a human hand striking metal with what was nearly the last of what it had. Ethan stopped. Sarah grabbed his sleeve. "Ethan." Every year between this night and another night in another country fell away in 1 second. A corridor, a locked door, a sound that slowed and stopped while he had made a different call and lived with the arithmetic of it ever since. He had told himself for years that there was no right answer, only a triage of necessity. But that was not the same as forgiveness, and he had never once confused the two. "Go," he said to Sarah. "Get to the tree line. Ruth is on the road." "Ethan, the fire!" "Go." He looked at Remy. The dog was already facing the interior wall, nose working, body angled toward the sound. "Stay with her," Ethan said, and pointed at Sarah. Remy looked at him for one full second. Then he turned and went with Sarah, and Ethan ran toward the knocking. He drove the pry bar through the inner latch, and the door tore open in a rush of heat and smoke. Inside, curled against the base of a metal kennel unit, was a boy, 8 years old maybe, brown hair, a face gone gray and enormous-eyed, in the way of children who have been afraid for long enough that fear stops feeling like an emergency and starts feeling like the permanent condition of being alive. He wore a navy hoodie 3 sizes too large, sweatpants, 1 sock. In both fists, clutched the way a person clutches the one solid thing in a dissolving world, an old leather dog collar with a cracked brass buckle. Ethan crouched in the smoke. He kept his voice steady and quiet. "Hey, I've got you." The boy flinched until Lena appeared in the doorway behind Ethan's shoulder. She had come back. Of course she had. She had not stayed with Sarah and Remy. She had come back because she had been counting, and the count was not complete. The boy looked at the dog, and he leaned forward, not toward the man, toward the dog. "Lena," the child rasped. The name hit harder than the heat. The child knew her. He knew her name, and he was holding her collar, and he had been holding it in the dark in a locked room inside a burning building, holding it like proof that the world had once contained something worth surviving for. There was no time for what that meant. There was almost no time for anything. Ethan lifted the boy. He weighed almost nothing. Too warm, shaking. The collar stayed locked in his fist, and Ethan did not try to take it. He turned for the door, and Lena led them out, 3 legs and fury, back through the smoke and the failing structure, and out into the cold night air where the sky above Black Pine had begun to go bright and orange at the edges. Sarah was at the tree line. She saw the boy in Ethan's arms and made a sound that was not quite a word. She took him without being asked, pulled him against her chest, and the boy let her, his face turning immediately toward Lena, who pressed her body against his legs as they moved. Below them, on the access road, headlights were climbing the hill. One set, then another behind it. Too many and too fast to belong to only one kind of answer. Remy barked from the tree line, deep and hard, and aimed down the hill like a signal fired into the dark. Above them, the annex roof cracked and a curtain of sparks lifted into the pines. And Ethan held the boy's weight against his chest and watched the road and waited to find out what kind of men were coming. Because everything that happened next depended entirely on that. The first vehicle that crested the hill belonged to Ruth Calloway. Ethan knew it by the way it drove. Not fast, not reckless, but with the unhesitating directness of a woman who had made her decision before she started the engine, and was not entertaining second thoughts on the way up. She had not waited 35 minutes. She had waited 22, and then done exactly what she promised. The second vehicle was a state emergency response unit, and the woman stepping out of the passenger side before it fully stopped was in her early 40s, dark hair pulled back, county emergency identification on her jacket, and the kind of face that arrived at scenes already working and did not require an orientation. Her name was Agent Diane Marsh, and Ruth had reached her through a contact 3 counties over, a former fire dispatch colleague who still knew which names in the state system had not been compromised by small-town arrangements. Marsh took in the burning annex, the armed deputy standing 20 yards to her left, the bruised young woman holding a child, the Navy SEAL in NWU camo, and the 2 German shepherds in the space of 4 seconds. Then she looked at Carver. "Deputy," she said, "I need your sidearm on the ground right now. Carver did not move immediately. He still had the posture of a man calculating whether authority was something that could be negotiated, the way he had been negotiating everything for the past 8 months. "I'm the law enforcement presence at this scene," he said. "There's a trespasser, a possible hostage situation." "Your sidearm," Marsh said again. "Ground. Now." Sarah's voice came from behind Ethan, raw and carrying. "He has been visiting Cedar Ridge Motor Inn off-book since March. No uniform, no lights, no incident reports. I have dates, times, and partial plate numbers on everything." She held up the micro SD card between 2 fingers. "And I have 14 months of records on here that will tell you the rest." Carver's face changed. Not all at once. In pieces, the way a structure failed when the wrong support was finally removed. He looked at the card. He looked at Marsh. He looked at Ethan, who was watching him with the patient, completely neutral expression of a man who had already decided how this ended, and was simply waiting for Carver to arrive at the same conclusion. Carver put the gun on the ground. One of the men from the response unit moved forward and secured it, and Carver stood there in the firelight, looking smaller than he had in every parking lot and every off-book visit and every quiet exchange he had thought no one was recording. He looked like what he had always been underneath the uniform. A tired man who had sold his judgment in increments and could no longer remember the original price he thought he was getting for it. Then, from the far edge of the tree line, movement. A figure breaking away from the shadows near the burning lodge, moving downhill through the brush in the deliberate low crouch of a man who had decided that distance was his last remaining option. Mason Dunlap. Ethan saw him at the same moment Remy did. The dog was already moving, angling downhill to cut the distance, and Ethan took 3 steps after them both before he stopped. The boy in Sarah's arms coughed. One small sound, thin and exhausted. The cough of a child whose body had been through too much and was finally, tentatively, beginning to believe it was allowed to rest. Ethan stopped walking. The old reflex said, "Go. Finish the shape of it. Close the night clean with your own hands, the way you were trained to close things, completely and without remainder." The reflex was loud, and it was familiar, and it had kept him alive in places where hesitation was a cause of death. But the boy was coughing, and Sarah was holding him, and Lena was pressed against the child's legs with her whole damaged body. And Remy was already sitting at the tree line, looking back at Ethan with the patient attention of a dog that had learned to follow his handler's final call, even when the instinct said otherwise. Ethan let Dunlap go, not because he was finished, because he understood, with the clarity that only arrived at the end of long nights, that some victories existed only to pull men away from what actually mattered. Dunlap would not run far enough. The record Sarah had kept for 14 months would not let him. He turned back to the clearing. Marsh was already on her radio. 2 of her team had Carver against the side of their vehicle, calm and procedural. Ruth had pulled her truck to the edge of the clearing and was standing beside it with her arms crossed and her eyes moving over the scene, the way a dispatcher's eyes moved, counting, categorizing, identifying what still needed to be handled. Ethan carried the boy to her. Ruth looked at the child for a long moment. She reached out and pushed the damp hair from his forehead with the back of her hand. The gesture of a woman who had raised children and buried a husband and dispatched other people's emergencies for 2 decades and had never once stopped knowing what tenderness was for. "What's your name, sweetheart?" she asked. The boy looked at her. He looked at Remy, sitting beside Ethan's boot. He looked at Lena, who had come to stand at Ruth's feet and was watching him with amber eyes that had seen the worst of the last several weeks and had not looked away from a single moment of it. "Nolan," the boy said. His voice was barely there, rough from smoke and disuse. But it was his, and he was using it, and that was everything. Ruth nodded once, very gently. "Nolan, all right. You're safe now." He stared at her for 3 full seconds. Then he turned his face toward Lena and pressed his forehead against the dog's neck and closed his eyes. Nobody spoke. The fire crackled behind them. The radio traffic continued. The practical machinery of accountability ground forward in the way it did when the right people finally arrived with the right authority and enough evidence to make denial more expensive than truth. Sarah handed Marsh the micro SD card and then sat down on the running board of Ruth's truck because her legs had decided they were done performing. She held the card out, and Marsh took it, and Sarah said, 14 months. Every cash transaction I could document. Every license plate I memorized. Every name Dunlap used when he thought I wasn't listening. I hid copies in 3 different places because I knew if they found one, they would assume there was only one. She looked at Marsh directly. He was moving people through that motel. Not just dogs. People who had no one looking for them and no one counting them. And Carver knew. Marsh looked at the card, then at Sarah. "How long were you held at the camp?" 4 days. Sarah said it without expression, the way people stated facts about terrible things when they had already processed the feeling privately and did not intend to do it again in public. "They didn't hurt me badly enough to silence me. That was their mistake. They thought frightened was the same as finished." Marsh put the card in her jacket pocket. "It wasn't," she said. "No," Sarah agreed. "It wasn't." Dunlap was apprehended before sunrise. He had made it 2 miles down a logging cut in the dark before a state patrol unit, already en route on Marsh's call, picked him up on the county road, trying to flag down a passing truck. He was wearing his good coat and carrying nothing. All the distance he had put between himself and Black Pine amounted to a wet field and a set of headlights that did not belong to anyone sympathetic. Nolan was reunited with his family within 48 hours. The details of how he had come to be at that camp, how long, through whose hands, belonged to investigators and sealed files, and the slow, painful work of institutions that had not moved fast enough, but were moving now. What Ethan knew was simpler. The boy had been in a locked room in a burning building, holding a dog's collar because it was the one solid thing in the world he had been able to reach. And that dog had stayed close enough to him, in whatever way she had been able to, that he knew her name, that he trusted the sound of it in the dark. Before Nolan left, he asked to say goodbye to Lena. Claire brought her forward on a loose lead, leg wrapped, moving carefully, her black and tan coat brushed clean for the first time in weeks. The boy stood in front of her and looked at her for a long time without speaking. Then he held out the old leather collar, both hands, the way children offered things they had decided were sacred. Lena touched it with her nose. Then she leaned her head forward and rested it briefly against the boy's chest. Nolan wrapped both arms around her neck and held on. Every adult in that room looked somewhere else for a moment. Not because the sight was hard to bear, because some things were too whole and too earned to be witnessed with anything less than total privacy. In the weeks that followed, the legal structure Dunlap had built from disputed paperwork and other people's exhaustion collapsed under the weight of real scrutiny. The management claim over Cedar Ridge Motor Inn had always rested on a temporary order and a chain of debts he had manufactured against a grieving estate. With Marsh's office holding Sarah's records and the state reviewing the county arrangement that had made Carver possible, the original terms of Mrs. Elaine Bowen's will resurfaced intact. The property belonged to Harold and Sarah Greer. It had always belonged to them. Harold tore out the storage room first. He cleared it to the foundation and did not rebuild it. The space became a covered kennel run, properly fenced and sheltered, for animals brought in from the highway until rescue placement could be arranged. Sarah opened a real ledger with real names and real dates, and she sat at the front desk of Cedar Ridge Motor Inn with the particular satisfaction of a person who had fought for something ordinary and won. Lena recovered. Her leg healed fully. Claire called it a minor medical achievement. Ethan called it stubbornness, which in his experience was the same thing with different paperwork. The two puppies grew. Harold named the darker one Wrench, and Sarah named the lighter one 11, and they did not explain either name to guests. And guests who asked were told only that the names made sense to the people who gave them. Ethan stayed, not because he became someone different. He did not. He still woke at bad hours, still went quiet in rooms where everyone else had finished talking, still carried the particular weight of a man who had compressed too much into too few years, and had not yet found a container large enough to hold all of it comfortably. But he fixed the roof where the sparks had spread. He rebuilt the fence along the south lot. He taught Nolan, during the boy's last visit before his family took him home, how to sand a splintered board without losing skin. One morning, pale and cold and scrubbed clean by a week of good weather, he stood at the back wall of Cedar Ridge Motor Inn with a small iron bell and a drill. He mounted it where the chain hook had been. When the wind moved, the bell touched the wall once, softly. A clear, unhurried note. Not harsh, not desperate, just metal speaking to open air. He listened to it ring. Once, twice, a third time. Then he stepped back and looked at the yard. Lena under the rear awning with her puppies tumbling around her. Harold trimming the overgrown hedge in slow, careful strokes. Sarah at the table near the office door, her new ledger open, a cup of coffee going cold beside it because she had been writing for an hour without stopping. Remy at Ethan's feet, chin on his paws, amber eyes tracking the yard with the quiet authority of a dog who had decided this place was worth watching over. For years, Ethan had believed that some sounds existed only to accuse. The chain in the storm, the door in the corridor, the knock that slowed and stopped while he made a different call and kept moving. He had built his whole post-service life on the logic of movement, that if he stayed ahead of stillness, stillness could not catch him and ask its questions. But the bell sounded different. It did not accuse. It did not demand. It only marked the air the way all honest things marked it, with the simple fact of its presence. Proof that some cries, even when they arrived late to the right ears, were not swallowed by the dark. He had almost kept driving. He had sat in that parking lot in the rain and told himself he only wanted coffee and 10 minutes out of the weather. And a dog who had been chained to a wall for 3 days, with a raw neck and a fever and 2 puppies she could not reach, had heard his footsteps and decided, against every instinct of self-preservation, to trust the sound of them. She had not saved herself first. She had chosen the door. She had chosen the thing weaker than herself. And that single choice, made by an animal with nothing left but the refusal to stop, had pulled one man back from the road he was taking to nowhere and aimed him, finally, somewhere that mattered. Sometimes God does not send thunder. He sends a chain striking a wall in the rain, and a man who almost does not hear it, and the moment between almost and turning back, that changes everything. Ethan picked up his coffee from the porch rail. It had gone cold. He drank it anyway. The bell rang once more in the morning wind, and Cedar Ridge Motor Inn held its ground under a pale and honest sky, full of ordinary life and the stubborn, unspectacular grace of people who had chosen, each in their own moment, to stay. If this story touched something in you, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that it is never too late to turn back toward what matters. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from. Tell us what part stayed with you. And if you believe that stories of loyalty, courage, and redemption still have a place in this world, subscribe to this channel, and walk with us through the stories ahead. Type Amen if you believe that mercy, even when it arrives late, is never truly lost. May God bless your home, protect the ones you love, and remind you, on the nights that feel longest, that a single choice to turn back toward another person's need is never too small to matter in heaven.